There is a field in the Arizona desert where thousands of military planes sit in silent rows under the sun, and the reason they ended up there is not what most people assume. From the ground you cannot see the end of it. Bombers, fighters, transports, and tankers stretch toward the horizon in straight lines, wingtip after wingtip, parked on bare desert with no hangars anywhere. From orbit, it looks like a circuit board pressed into the dirt. Satellite images show it clearly, and it is one of the easiest military sites on Earth to spot from space. The place sits on the edge of Tucson, at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. People call it the Boneyard. The Air Force calls it the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group. It covers about 2,600 acres. The aircraft parked there have been valued at roughly $35 billion in replacement cost, which makes this quiet patch of desert one of the most valuable parking lots anywhere. Most people assume it is a junkyard. It is not. It is a storage and repair operation, and some of the planes sitting out there will fly again years after they were retired. So the obvious question is, why Arizona? The Air Force had bases in every state, thousands of miles of open land, and plenty of empty airfields. It picked this one on purpose. The answer starts in 1945. The fighting stopped, the contracts ended, and the United States suddenly owned more military aircraft than it could ever use again in peacetime. American factories had turned out roughly 300,000 military aircraft during the war. When it ended, tens of thousands of them had no mission, no crews, and no reason to keep burning fuel. Scrapping them all sounded simple, until someone did the math. Many were nearly new. Melting a brand new bomber down for aluminum meant throwing away engines, instruments, and airframes worth far more intact. So the government scattered surplus aircraft across the country. Fields in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Arizona filled up with parked bombers, and each site had to prove it could actually hold them. Kingman, Arizona took in around 5,500 aircraft at Storage Depot 41. Rows of B-17s and B-24s sat in the open while crews worked through them. Almost all were melted down by 1948. Walnut Ridge in Arkansas and Altus in Oklahoma did the same thing. Thousands of aircraft arrived, sat for a while, and were cut apart. Those sites closed, and the land went back to farming. The damp sites had a problem that showed up fast. Aluminum skin corrodes, steel fittings rust, rubber seals swell and rot, and wiring insulation breaks down when moisture sits on metal month after month. A plane left outside in a humid climate does not wait patiently. It quietly destroys itself. Within a couple of years, the cost of returning it to flight can pass the cost of building new. In 1946, the Army Air Forces sent B-29 Superfortresses and C-47 transports to Davis-Monthan in Tucson for long-term storage. That decision is the seed of everything sitting there today. The B-29 mattered. It was the only bomber that could carry an atomic weapon at the time, and relations with the Soviet Union were turning cold. Nobody wanted to scrap that fleet. Now comes the first real reason for Arizona. Tucson air is extremely dry. Humidity often sits in the teens or lower, and moisture is the single biggest enemy of a parked airframe. Rainfall averages roughly 11 inches a year, and much of that arrives in short summer storms. Water rarely sits on the aircraft long enough to work its way into seams and joints. Elevation helps too. The base sits around 2,550 feet above sea level. Higher ground means thinner, drier air, less standing moisture, and fewer of the damp mornings that soak metal overnight. There is another factor people forget. Tucson is hundreds of miles from the ocean. No salt spray drifts in on the wind, and salt is what eats coastal aircraft alive. Winters are mild. There is essentially no snow load to worry about, no ice expanding inside control surfaces, and no freeze and thaw cycle cracking components apart season after season. The weather also means crews can work outdoors almost every day of the year. Preservation, inspection, and parts removal never stop for a blizzard, which keeps the whole operation cheap and predictable. Arizona already had the infrastructure. Clear skies had made the state a training center during the war, with dozens of airfields built for pilots who needed flying weather nearly every single day. Land was open and cheap. There were no neighborhoods pressing against the fence line, no farmland to buy out, and nobody complaining about thousands of aircraft parked next to their property. Isolation helped security. A remote desert perimeter is easy to watch, easy to fence, and hard to approach without being seen long before anyone reaches the first row of aircraft. Here is the part that surprises people. Dry air alone was not enough to win the decision. other dry places existed. Something under the aircraft mattered just as much as the sky above them. The desert around Tucson sits on caliche. It is a natural hard pan of soil, cemented together by calcium carbonate, and it forms a surface almost as tough as weak concrete. That changed the economics completely. Storing thousands of aircraft normally means paving thousands of acres of ramp. In Tucson, the ground was already hard enough to hold them. Heavy bombers could be rolled straight onto packed desert without sinking, cracking the surface, or bogging down after rain. The landing gear stayed level, and the airframe stayed properly supported. Crews tow aircraft across that ground routinely, moving airframes weighing tens of thousands of pounds into position. The soil takes the weight, and the tires do not dig trenches behind them. But the desert gives with one hand and takes with the other. The same sun that keeps everything dry is brutal on anything that is not bare metal. Summer air temperatures climb past 110 degrees. Inside a sealed cockpit, sitting in direct sun, it gets far hotter, hot enough to warp plastics and cook sensitive instrument components. Ultraviolet light attacks rubber, vinyl, and paint. Seals crack, hoses stiffen, tires check and split, and canopy glass clouds over. Left untreated, sunlight would ruin a stored plane in a few seasons. So crews spray the openings with a vinyl compound called Spraylat. 2 coats go on. The first layer is black and seals tight. The second layer is white and reflects sunlight. That white outer coat is doing serious work. It can hold the interior of a stored aircraft roughly 30 degrees cooler than the outside air, which protects everything sealed inside. Before any of that, each arriving aircraft gets washed. Crews strip off accumulated salt and grime from wherever the plane last operated, because leaving salt on the skin defeats the whole point. Fuel systems get drained, then filled with a light-preserving oil that is circulated through the lines and drained again. A protective film stays behind, coating the inside of every tank and pipe. Guns come out. Ejection seat charges and other explosive devices are removed. Classified equipment is pulled and accounted for. Nothing dangerous or sensitive stays in a plane parked in open desert. Aircraft are set up so weight is carried properly over long periods, protecting landing gear, struts, and tires. A plane that sits wrong for years can be damaged before anyone touches it. Preservation is not permanent. Aircraft in long-term storage get inspected and re-preserved on a repeating cycle, with coatings renewed and condition checked, so the fleet never quietly decays out of sight. Not every plane there has the same future. Storage is sorted into categories. Type 1000 aircraft are kept complete and untouched, with no parts removed, ready to be returned to flying condition. Type 2000 aircraft are the parts donors. Technicians pull engines, panels, avionics, and landing gear from them to keep aircraft still flying in squadrons around the world in the air. Type 3000 is short-term. These aircraft are in a holding pattern, expected to move on soon, so they get lighter preservation and stay closer to ready condition than the long-term rows. Type 4000 is the end of the line. Those aircraft have been declared excess. They are stripped of anything useful and then sold or scrapped, with the metal recycled back into the economy. The Navy learned the same lesson Arizona had already taught. Its storage site at Litchfield Park near Phoenix closed in 1965, and its aircraft were consolidated at Davis-Monthan alongside the Air Force fleet. That consolidation changed what the place was. In 1965, it became the Military Aircraft Storage and Disposition Center, handling aircraft for every branch of the American military rather than just one. The name changed again in 1985 to the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Center, and once more in 2007 to the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, which is what it is called now. The storage idea proved itself quickly. When war broke out in Korea in 1950, stored B-29s and transports were pulled from the desert, brought back to flying condition, and sent to combat. It happened again through the following decades. Aircraft that had been written off as surplus came out of storage when demand spiked, saving years of production time the military did not have. The parts side may matter even more. Every year technicians pull thousands of components from stored aircraft and ship them to units flying older airframes that no factory still supports. That work pays for itself many times over. The site has long been cited as returning around $11 in value for every single dollar spent operating it. Roughly 500 people work there. Most are civilians, and many spend entire careers learning how specific aircraft types age, corrode, and come back to life in that particular climate. Some aircraft leave for stranger jobs. Retired F-4 Phantoms and later F-16s were rebuilt into remotely flown target drones, given a fresh purpose after being parked as obsolete. The desert also became the place where treaties were carried out in public view. Arms control agreements with the Soviet Union required proof that specific bombers had been permanently destroyed. So a crane hoisted a steel blade weighing about 13,000 pounds and dropped it on parked B-52s, chopping each bomber into pieces at the wings and tail in a few strikes. The pieces were left lying in the open on the desert floor for months, arranged so Russian satellites passing overhead could photograph them and confirm the bombers were genuinely gone. Hundreds of B-52s were destroyed that way. Arizona sunlight, flat open ground and clear skies made verification simple, which is a use for the desert nobody planned for in 1946. Then there is the opposite story. In 2015, a B-52 nicknamed Ghost Rider was pulled from storage, restored, and returned to fully operational service with the Air Force. Another B-52 called Wise Guy came out in 2019 and did the same thing. Both had sat in the desert for years, and both went back to work as frontline bombers. Those regenerations are the clearest proof the location works. A bomber parked outdoors in a humid climate for a decade would never have flown again. In Tucson, it did. The site keeps rare aircraft in a section informally known as Celebrity Row, where unusual airframes and historically important machines are parked where visitors and photographers can actually see them. The public can look. Bus tours run through the storage area in cooperation with the Pima Air and Space Museum next door, which is how most people ever see it up close. Stored aircraft also support allied nations. Older airframes and their parts are sold through foreign military sales programs, keeping fleets flying in countries that bought American aircraft decades ago. Walk the rows today, and the inventory reads like aviation history. B-52s, KC-135 tankers, C-130 transports, A-10s, F-14 Tomcats, F-4 Phantoms and helicopters by the hundreds. The total moves with the budget cycle. Depending on the year, somewhere between about 3,000 and 4,000 aircraft are parked there at any given time. Put that same fleet in Florida, Louisiana, or coastal California, and the story ends differently. Salt air, heavy rain, and constant humidity would turn those airframes into scrap within a few years. So the reason the Air Force chose Arizona was never one thing. It was a stack of conditions that happened to line up in that one corner of the Sonoran Desert. Low humidity keeps corrosion slow. Little rain keeps water out of seams. High ground and distance from the sea remove salt. Mild winters let crews work every month of the year. And underneath all of it sits the caliche, hard enough to park a bomber on without pouring a single yard of concrete. That ground is the quiet reason this became the world's largest aircraft storage site. The Air Force did not pick Arizona for the view. It picked a place where time moves slower on metal, and 80 years later, those rows of aircraft are still waiting for the call.